Gallows humor, otherwise known as dark humor, is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as jokes or humorous remarks that are made about unpleasant or worrying subjects, such as death and illness.
It is something that raises questions about modern politics and morality. In one hand, some may consider it offensive, and others believe it should be protected by freedom of speech.
Those who believe that dark humor is offensive believe that it incentivizes and normalizes the already pre-existing forms of discriminations, and others are for the belief that they are jokes, and are intended to do so, and should be taken as so. At the time, most of the public showed outrage, and Just We Shall Lead became the battle cry of those who believed the satirical newspapers was on the right side, and that brutality was never justified.
Some people would believe that although nothing justifies murder, the newspaper Charlie Hebdo passed clearly the limits of the humor by criticizing millions of people.
And that idea of arguments breeding violence through criticizing and offending people was also present in a much more naive case.
There was this guy of 28 years old that teached his girlfriend Pug to salute the Nazi Empire.
He also responded to the phrase "cast the Jews." The video was uploaded to YouTube, and then, subsequently, to the popular content sharing website Reddit. This was not a problem. However, it became one when a leader of the Jewish community saw the video and became extremely offended. He said that, seeing as we have laws against inciting racial hatred, the police might want to have a look at this. A few weeks after the reaction, Marcus Meechin, the owner of the Pug, gets arrested. Some believe that, just like Charlie's Hebdo, Marcus was deliberately being joker and jovial, and that he decided to make a joke and post it on YouTube. Others, however, believe that making Holocaust jokes and making anti-Semitic jokes are completely unacceptable, and thus both the video and the author should get punished. I personally believe that no kind of speech should ever be suppressed. However, I understand the argument of those who go against it. It is important that we understand both sides of an argument so we can decide it forward. However, it is also important to highlight that arguments can only happen when there's freedom of speech. And that freedom of speech should be protected because only through debate a society can truly thrive. And although some may not like parts of the debate, it is important to know that although you want to censor someone today, the guidelines that you impose will invariably be something that is based on your true experience, only your experience, very personal, and something that will be different to others. And thus, nothing guarantees that tomorrow you will not be the one that is being silenced. Thank you. So do you believe that there's any point, any kind of speech should be restricted?
Yes, I do.
And what is that point?
Well, I don't. It depends a lot on the situation. It depends on a lot of the context, because you can say one thing in a certain place, and that could be allowed rather than in another place. So it really depends on a lot of things.
Do you think whether or not something is humoristic or intended to be something that is funny or humoristic should weigh in on whether or not your kind of speech is acceptable or not?
Yeah, it should. I mean, when you are known for parody, like for example, let's take The Onion, right?
Yeah.
That's going to offend people, but that's kind of the point of comedy. The point of comedy is, and humor, is to kind of challenge. I think it's kind of to challenge at times what we think, and sometimes it makes it uncomfortable and people get offensive. But if it's in the right context, I think that's okay.
Mm-hmm. And even in humor, do you think sometimes some people cross the line in terms of jokes that just exceed the point?
Again, I think it depends a lot on the context, right? Because if you make, I don't know what kind of joke would be a joke about a baby dying, for example, but if you joked about that to like a mother whose baby just died, that would be something that's unacceptable, and you have to think about that. Not in terms of a humor and freedom of speech side, but more of like an empathy side, and a human side.
For instance, one of our examples is this man who taught his girlfriend's dog to do a Nazi salute and posted the video so everybody could see. Do you think that is acceptable or not?
That's a tough one. because I don't know the answer. I mean, I know that some people are going to get offended. And that's something that happened now almost, 80 years ago, right? With Hitler and all that stuff. So, but then there's other things that happened 5 years ago, and yet we're allowed to kind of joke around about that. I'm not saying either one is right, but it's just interesting how there are different rules for different occurrences. Not even time periods, just different kinds of atrocities, I guess.
Thank you.
Good?
Kind of works. Do you think that at any time somebody should be restricted on freedom of speech based on what they say?
No.
No. Do you think that there's any point where speech becomes unanimously offensive?
What do you mean by
Everyone.
point?
Do you think that there's do you think that there's speech that could offend, for instance, everyone? Like, there's speech that could be just considered offensive, as is.
Yes, depending on the way that the person says it or to whom she's addressing it, I believe so.
Do you think that whether or not what is said in a humoristic form, do you think that affects whether or not it is offensive?
I think it does, but because if a person says it in a humoristic form, she's usually trying to pull up herself.
Não precisa fazer nada, cara. Tá, esse é um cara correndo aqui, mano. Mano. Foda-se, vai, eu corto essa parte.
Tá.
Tá, eu vou começar a dar uma pergunta de novo.
Tá bom, tá bom.
Do you think that whether or not what was said in a humoristic way changes? Do you think whether or not what is said in a humoristic way changes whether or not it is acceptable or not?
I think it does, because when someone says something as a joke, even though some people might get offended, their purpose was not to offend the people, it was to make humorous satire about the topic that they were joking at.
Do you think that private places and platforms like YouTube should restrict what is said based on whether or not it is considered offensive by some people or not?
I think it should be restricted if, for example, the person is deliberately giving a hate speech or something like that. But if the person is using humor, I don't think so, because I watch a lot of humor shows and all those things, and sometimes they're offensive, and I think that without that little part they wouldn't be as complete as they are.
For sure. Do you think that speech should ever be restricted? There's a limit to freedom of speech on anything.
Think that there should be a limit on the right of everyone to free speech, so long as it is disruptive to public order or that it is plainly offensive.
Do you think that whether or not something is humoristic plays a role in that limit?
Yes.
So do you think that whether or not something is humoristic should play a role on whether or not it is considered offensive by the general population?
Yes.
For instance, do you believe that something that was originally intended as a joke should be considered as a separate case from actual, for instance, Nazi propaganda?
Yes, but I see how the population would hold its right to be offensive and to speak against it.
What do you think about this meme?
I won't deny it's pretty funny.
Do you think that at any point freedom of speech should be restricted?
Of course not.
Do you think that at any point society as a whole should feel offended by humor?
Society has all the rights and absolutely all the reason to feel offended, but it shouldn't be spread.
So what do you think that this meme here is acceptable and should be able to be seen in society?
Well, yeah, because it is part of something that actually happened in the past. And even though it's not the most common type of humor, it is still a sort of humor that people seem to enjoy with their twisted minds. I'm not gonna deny I could be one of them. But it shouldn't be censored if that's what you're seeking to ask. It shouldn't.
And do you think that private institutions should have the right to limit certain types of free speech?
It really depends on what kind of speech is being delivered, but I don't think they should interfere because freedom of speech is freedom of speech. You have it or you don't. There's no really in between.
So, do you think that at any point society should limit what people say on the grounds that it is offensive?
Yes.
What, for instance, should be restricted?
Maybe like some type of jokes that we make. They're not. I don't know if I'm getting like what you. I'm saying what you want, but like if sometimes you take it like the jokes too far. Maybe when you want to joke with someone that it's like darker skin color, you go and say like you're nigga or something like that. I don't think that's nice. You
So
know?
do you think, for instance, that this is acceptable?
No. But unfortunately, I laughed. So like it's funny in a way.
Gracias. Do you believe that society should limit what people say in any way, shape, or form?
No, I don't believe that.
Do you believe that humor can ever be considered offensive?
No, it should be illegal.
So you think that something like this, for instance, is completely acceptable, this kind of memes?
Sure.
For instance, with a joke like this, what do you think should be the acceptable reaction by society?
Okay, let me see.
Just don't read it out loud.
Well, it's it's funny. I have to accept it's funny. But if for example, if I show this to someone, like maybe it's going to get offended. But it doesn't like change society. I don't have any problem with that because I know that it's meant to be a joke and it's not serious.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Gracias.
Nada.
So I'm going to show you a meme, and you're going to tell me what you think would be the acceptable society, like whether or not society should try and stop this kind of humor from happening.
Well, I mean, it's definitely intended to be humoristic, and I mean, since you're not necessarily making fun of a particular group of people, and in this case, it's clearly intended to just be funny and not offend anyone. I think this type of thing is okay.
Gracias. For instance, do you think something that was intended originally as a joke should be considered offensive by the general population?
Well,
A gente tá gravando, filho do puta. Tá bom. Isso aqui vai estar no vídeo.
Caralho, o cara vai dar uma de engraçadão agora, né?